December 1941. Outside Moscow, German infantry move through waist-deep snow. Every step requires a physical struggle. The temperature sits at -30 degrees. Cold air cuts through thin wool uniforms. Ahead, a village burns. The fire provides no relief. Only Soviet machine gun fire waits in the ruins, 15 kilometers. That is the distance to the Kremlin, 9 miles. On a clear day, German officers look through binoculars and see the golden domes of the city. But they will never enter the gates. Supply lines have collapsed, trucks are frozen in place, reinforcements are not coming. In 3 days, the situation will change. A massive Soviet counteroffensive will begin. It will push the Wehrmacht back hundreds of kilometers. But a question remains. Why did the German machine stall here? At first glance, a failure of winter gear. But in reality, a failure of grand strategy. What if these soldiers had backup? Imagine every German aircraft fighting over London was redirected to the Eastern Front. Imagine every Panzer division stuck in the North African sand was instead charging toward Moscow. What if Berlin focused every resource and every bullet on one single goal, destroying the Soviet Union? Could Nazi Germany have won a one-on-one war? The answer reveals the cold logic of industrial conflict. It is not about the bravery of soldiers, it is about the math of total war. Why did the German offensive fail? It seemed they had the better equipment, but the Soviet Union had the depth. Make a prediction now. Nazi Germany versus the Soviet Union, one-on-one. No British Royal Air Force, no American Lend-Lease, no distractions in the desert. Who stands at the end? The footage from 1941 shows the truth. German horses are dying in the snow. Soldiers are wrapping their feet in newspaper. The sound of Katyusha rockets fills the air. The reality of the Eastern Front was a meat grinder that consumed entire armies. Events accelerated. To understand the outcome, we must look at the factories, not just the front lines. This is not a story of generals. It is a story of economics and raw power. Thus, we begin the analysis. September 1939. Germany invades Poland. The war begins exactly as it did historically. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa launches. 3 million German soldiers cross into Soviet territory. It remains the largest invasion in human history. Adolf Hitler is still in command. He holds the same ideology, the same ambitions, and the same genocidal objectives. What changes? Summer 1940. The Battle of Britain never happens. The Luftwaffe does not lose nearly 1,900 aircraft and 2,700 experienced aircrew over England. February 1941. Erwin Rommel never gets sent to North Africa. The Afrika Korps stays home. Those elite Panzer divisions remain in Europe, refitting and preparing for a different target. December 11, 1941. Hitler does not declare war on the United States. Germany never adds the world's largest industrial economy to its list of enemies. Washington stays focused on the Pacific. The strategic map shifts. No Western Front, no Mediterranean campaign, no Atlantic Wall construction, no heavy bombers over German industrial cities. Everything Germany has goes east. This is Hitler's fantasy scenario. It is a single-front war against Bolshevism. Total focus. The question is simple. Does it work? The numbers provide the answer. In the Battle of Britain between July and October 1940, the Luftwaffe threw its entire weight at England. The goal was to destroy the Royal Air Force and clear the channel for an invasion. It failed. The final tally was 1,887 German aircraft destroyed or damaged. This included 873 fighters and 1,014 bombers. But here is what really hurt. 2,698 aircrew were killed or captured. These were not rookies. These were veteran pilots who had flown combat missions in Poland and France. They were irreplaceable. In this scenario, these men are not dead. They are sitting in airfields in Poland and East Prussia. They are waiting for the signal to fly toward Moscow. Events accelerated. The footage from the era shows the scale. Thousands of Messerschmitts and Junkers are lined up on grass runways. Mechanics are loading bombs and checking fuel lines. There is no Royal Air Force to intercept them. There are no American factories churning out B-17 bombers to wreck the German supply lines. At first glance, Germany is unstoppable, but in reality, the Soviet Union is vast. By June 1941, the German military is significantly stronger than it was in our timeline. The Panzer divisions that were stuck in the sands of North Africa are now positioned on the Soviet border. The tanks are clean, the crews are rested, and the supply chains are short. They do not have to worry about British commandos or American landing craft. The sound of the first artillery barrage marks the start. The Luftwaffe takes to the skies. This time, they have 2,000 more planes than they did historically. They have the veteran pilots who should have died over London. There was no turning back. Thus, the stage was set for a total war. June 22, 1941. 3 million German soldiers strike the Soviet border. But the force is not at its peak. What if the Mediterranean never happened? Imagine every aircraft and every pilot diverted to the Eastern Front. No North Africa, no desert war. In the real timeline, the Afrika Korps started as a small detachment. February 1941, the 5th Light Division lands in Libya. April 1941, the 15th Panzer Division reinforces them. By August, the 5th Light Division becomes the 21st Panzer Division. Later, the 90th Light Infantry Division enters the theater. By 1942, 3 to 4 elite mechanized divisions are locked in the sand. These are the Wehrmacht's best assets. They are veteran troops. They are led by Erwin Rommel, a top-tier commander. They are fighting 2,000 kilometers away from the decisive theater. The logistics are a nightmare. The camera shows German freighters docked in Tripoli. Fuel and ammunition move from ships to trucks. These convoys drive hundreds of kilometers across open desert. British planes harass the lines. Every gallon of fuel burned here is a gallon missing from the drive to Moscow. It gets worse. Without a declaration of war against the United States, the sky over Germany remains clear. There are no American heavy bombers. The Luftwaffe does not need to pull fighter wings back to defend German cities. Thousands of 88mm anti-aircraft guns are not protecting Berlin or Hamburg. They are at the front, hunting Soviet tanks. There is no U-boat campaign. The Atlantic is quiet. Steel, crews, and resources are diverted from submarines to land power. There is no Atlantic Wall. Thousands of tons of concrete and steel are not poured into bunkers on the French coast. The engineers are in Russia, building bridges and fortifications. At first glance, these are small theater losses. But in reality, it is a massive drain on resources. Add the numbers together. Germany gains 20 to 30% more effective combat power for Operation Barbarossa. The math is simple. 1,900 additional aircraft for air support, 4 elite mechanized divisions ready for the breakthrough, hundreds of thousands of tons of fuel diverted to the panzer groups. Why did Hitler choose the desert over the decisive blow? He prioritized a sideshow. The price was paid in Russia. The calculation changes the entire war. December 5th, 1941. At this moment, the German front line sits on the edge of the Soviet capital. The geography is precise. In the original timeline, Wehrmacht units reached the outskirts of Moscow. Some patrols advanced within 15 kilometers of the city center. Officers pulled out field glasses and looked toward the horizon. They could see the spires of the Kremlin. They watched the skyline, but they never moved an inch closer. Why did the machine stop? The Red Army launched a massive counteroffensive. German supply lines were thousands of kilometers long and completely broken. The soldiers were starving and lacked winter uniforms. Temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below zero. The offensive stalled, and the German army began a long, bloody retreat. But there is a critical detail. This entire battle was decided by narrow margins. German field marshals begged Berlin for reinforcements. They asked for 3 more divisions. They requested 2 more air wings. In this scenario, they receive exactly what they asked for. The extra divisions from North Africa are present. The Luftwaffe squadrons that historically crashed over the English Channel are fueled and ready in the east. By December 1941, the German army possesses 30% more combat power on the Moscow axis. The result changes. The line does not hold. The Wehrmacht breaks through the final defensive ring. Moscow falls. What happens to the north? In our history, Leningrad endured a siege lasting 872 days. The city was isolated, starved, and hit by millions of shells. It never surrendered. The siege lasted from September 1941 until January 1944. But in this timeline, the variables shift. Germany brings in fresh veteran divisions from the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Wall. They launch a focused, heavy assault in early 1942. Heavy artillery arrives from the Western Front. The blockade becomes a massacre. Leningrad falls. How did the Soviets react? Confusion is visible in the command centers. The loss of the two largest cities creates a logistical vacuum. There is no central rail hub left. Summer 1942. The focus moves south to the Caucasus. This was the primary objective of the entire war. The destination is Baku. The prize is the oil fields. Without fuel, the Red Army cannot move. With these new forces, the German path to the oil is open. Events accelerated. The Soviet defense collapsed. The strategy changed from a war of attrition to a total takeover. The oil began to flow west. Thus, the Eastern Front was redefined. 1941. Azerbaijan becomes the engine of the Soviet war effort. Baku alone produces 23.5 million tons of crude oil in a single year. Throughout the entire conflict, the region supplies 75 million tons to the military. The numbers are staggering. 70 to 75% of all Soviet oil comes from the Caucasus. 80% of its gasoline and 90% of its motor oils originate in Baku. Without this region, the Red Army stops moving. Engines die. Soviet tanks become stationary metal boxes. Aircraft remain grounded on dirt runways. The scale of fuel consumption was immense. During the Battle of Stalingrad, the Red Army burns through 149,000 tons of fuel. Most of it flows directly from Baku. German forces face a different reality. They enter the battle with dry tanks and zero reserves. In our timeline, the 1942 German offensive, Case Blue, targets the Caucasus directly. The Wehrmacht reaches the outskirts of Grozny, but Baku remains out of reach. Why did they fail? The answer is simple. There were not enough boots on the ground. German resources were split across 3 continents. North Africa pulled divisions away from the Eastern Front. The Luftwaffe was forced back to defend German cities from British bombers. Resources were hemorrhaging. In this scenario, those distractions vanish. The year is 1942. Germany concentrates its full military weight on a single objective, the Caucasus. The oil fields fall. The footage would show German flags over the derricks. Look at the map in late 1942. The situation is unrecognizable. Moscow has fallen. The center of Soviet power is gone. Stalin's government has fled east, retreating to Sverdlovsk or deeper into the Ural Mountains. The Soviet state is severed from its lifeblood. The machines of war have stopped. Leningrad is captured. The Northern Front is fully secured. German forces occupy the Caucasus. This victory gives the Third Reich control over 23.5 million tons of oil per year. Fuel that once powered the Red Army now flows into Wehrmacht tanks. Germany controls every square mile west of the Ural Mountains. On paper, the war is won. But a new reality emerges. It is a factor the German High Command failed to grasp during the planning of Operation Barbarossa. What was the variable they missed? The answer lay in the smoke of the eastern horizon. The factories were gone. Between July and November 1941, the Soviet Union launched a logistical operation without precedent. As German tanks advanced, Soviet engineers began dismantling their own industrial heartland. 1,523 factories were stripped to the concrete. Every bolt, every lathe, and every heavy press was loaded onto rail cars. These industrial plants were shipped thousands of miles east to the Ural Mountains. The machines did not travel alone. 10 million people followed the tracks. This included workers, specialized engineers, and their entire families. Entire cities were effectively uprooted and replanted in the wilderness. Why did the German intelligence fail to see this? They focused on the front lines. Meanwhile, the Soviets were building new industrial hubs in Sverdlovsk, Chelyabinsk, and Nizhny Tagil. These were names the German generals had never heard of. More importantly, these cities sat far beyond the flight range of the Luftwaffe. The factories were untouchable. By 1943, these relocated plants reached maximum output. The scale of production was devastating. In 1942, Germany manufactured 9,300 tanks. In that same year, the Soviet Union produced 24,500 tanks. The footage from the era is clear. Row after row of T-34 hulls exit the assembly lines. For every German Panzer on the field, the Soviets built nearly 3. The machines of the Urals had overtaken the Reich. At first glance, Germany held the territory, but in reality, they had already lost the war of attrition. The industrial ghost of the West had been reborn in the East. There was no turning back. 3-1. That was the ratio of Soviet tank production compared to Germany. In 1942, the Soviet Union manufactured 25,400 aircraft. During that same period, German factories produced only 15,400. Germany controlled the resources of occupied Europe, yet it remained behind. The gap between the two powers widened every month. Then came the problem of space. 1,400 kilometers. That is the distance from Moscow to the Ural Mountains. German logistics were already failing before they reached the capital. Supply lines stretched across thousands of miles of destroyed Soviet infrastructure. Soviet trains ran on a different rail gauge than German ones. This forced the Germans to reload every crate of ammunition at the border. The weather made it worse. Roads turned to deep mud in the spring and autumn. The footage from the front shows trucks buried to their axles. Even if Moscow fell, the war would continue. Even if the Caucasus oil fields were captured, the Soviet machine would not stop. Production continued in the east. New armies formed beyond the Volga River. The Red Army traded space for time. They pulled German forces deeper into a massive frozen landmass. Germany could build a defensive line. They could hold Moscow and the Caucasus, but they could not push further east. The distances were impossible for horse-drawn logistics. By late 1942, Germany held the most populated regions of the USSR. They occupied the industrial heartland, but they had not won. How could the Soviet Union push them back? Production beyond the Urals was high, but it was not enough to win alone. A critical factor remains. In our timeline, this event changed the trajectory of the entire conflict. December 11, 1941. On this day, Adolf Hitler declared war on the United States. He turned a European struggle into a global conflict. There was no turning back. Thus, the pressure on the Eastern Front began to shift. December 11, 1941. 4 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Adolf Hitler stands before the Reichstag. He declares war on the United States. Historians call this the most catastrophic strategic error of the Second World War. With one speech, Germany challenged a nation with 10 times its industrial capacity. But in this scenario, the speech never happens. Hitler remains silent. There is no declaration of war against Washington. No American divisions arrive in the European theater. Most importantly, the United States never begins the Lend-Lease program for the Soviet Union. What does this change on the ground? It comes down to one word: trucks. This is the critical factor that dictated the speed of the Eastern Front. It is a detail most people overlook when studying maps of the war. 427,284. That is the exact number of trucks the United States shipped to the Soviet Union. It was not a small contribution. It was a massive mechanical flood. Why was this decisive? The Soviet Union excelled at building tanks. Factories deep behind the Ural Mountains produced T-34s by the thousands. They had the steel and the assembly lines for heavy armor. But Soviet truck production was almost non-existent. The factories were too busy building weapons to focus on logistics. American industry filled the gap. Studebaker, Dodge, GMC. These vehicles were rugged, reliable, and designed for the mud of a battlefield. They were built for military endurance. By 1944, the data is clear. 70% of all Red Army vehicles were imported. Most of them were American. Soviet soldiers even gave the Studebaker a nickname, Studa. They used these machines for every task imaginable. The trucks did more than just haul crates. They became the standard platform for the Katyusha rocket launchers. The footage from 1944 and 1945 shows these famous rocket systems. They are almost all rolling on American truck chassis. The trucks carried the weight of the war. They hauled Soviet ammunition to the front lines. They moved entire infantry divisions. They transported food and fuel across thousands of miles of destroyed territory. These vehicles gave the Red Army the mobility to strike deep into German lines. What happens without the Studebakers? In this reality, Soviet logistics collapse. The Red Army remains a static force. Without wheels, the Soviet steamroller stops in its tracks.